Well, welcome everyone. Today is Sabbath, February 26, 2022, and I'd like to welcome you to today's edition of Bible Hour 1. And today we're going to focus on one of the minor prophets, the prophet Micah. And we'll go directly to the text and read through this minor prophet. And by the way, the minor prophets, they're termed minor prophets not because of anything having to do with their level or degree of importance, but simply because the books are shorter as compared to something like Isaiah or Jeremiah or Daniel. And usually they're bundled up in the bundle of 12, book of the book of the minor prophets, and Micah is one of those prophets. So let's turn to Micah, and we'll read through the entire book. It's 7 chapters long, and I'm going to be using a New American Standard Bible Version, NASB. Micah 1. The word of Yahweh, which came to Micah of Moresheth in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem. Hear, O peoples, all of you. Listen, O earth, and all it contains, and let Yahweh Elohim be a witness against you, Yahweh from his holy temple. For behold, Yahweh is coming forth from his place. He will come down and tread on the high places of the earth. The mountains will melt under him, and the valleys will be split, like wax before the fire, like water poured down a steep place. All this is for the rebellion of Jacob and for the sins of the house of Israel. What is the rebellion of Jacob? Is it not Samaria? What is the high place of Judah? Is it not Jerusalem? For I will make Samaria a heap of ruins in the open country, planting places for a vineyard. I will pour her stones down into the valley and will lay bare her foundations. All of her idols will be smashed. All of her earnings will be burned with fire, and all of her images I will make desolate. For she collected them from a harlot's earnings, and to the earnings of a harlot they will return. Because of this, I must lament and wail. I must go barefoot and naked. I must make a lament like the jackals, and a mourning like the ostriches. For her wound is incurable. For it has come to Judah, it has reached the gate of my people, even to Jerusalem. Tell it not in Gath, weep not at all. At Beth Le'afrah, roll yourself into dust. Go on your way, inhabitant of Shaphir, in shameful nakedness. The inhabitant of Zaanan does not escape. The lamentation of Beth Ezel, he will take from you its support. For the inhabitant of Maroth becomes weak, waiting for good, because a calamity has gone down from Yahweh to the gate of Jerusalem. Harness the chariot to the team of horses, O inhabitant of Lachish. She was the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion, because in you were found the rebellious acts of Israel. Therefore, you will give parting gifts on behalf of Moresheth Gath. The houses of Achzim will become a deception to the kings of Israel. Moreover, I will bring on you the one who takes possession, O inhabitant of Mareshah. The glory of Israel will enter Adullam. Make yourself bald and cut off your hair because of the children of your delight. Extend your baldness like the eagle, for they will go from you into exile. Chapter 2. Woe to those who scheme iniquity, who work out evil on their beds. When morning comes, they do it, for it is in the power of their hands. They covet fields and then seize them and houses and take them away. They rob a man in his house, a man in his inheritance. Therefore, thus says Yahweh, behold, I am planning against this family a calamity from which you cannot remove your necks. You will not walk haughtily, for it will be an evil time. On that day, they will take up against you a taunt and utter a bitter lamentation and say, we are completely destroyed. He exchanges the portion of my people, how he removes it from me. To the apostate, he apportions our fields. Therefore, you will have no one stretching a measuring line for you by lot in the assembly of Yahweh. Do not speak out, so they speak out. But if they do not speak out concerning these things, reproaches will not be turned back. Is it being said, O house of Jacob, is the spirit of Yahweh impatient? Are these his doings? Do not my words do good to the one walking uprightly? Recently, my people have arisen as an enemy. You strip the robe off the garment from unsuspecting passersby, from those returned from war. The women of my people you evict, every one from her pleasant house. From her children you take my splendor forever. Arise and go, for this is no place of rest, because of the uncleanness that brings on destruction, a painful destruction. If a man walking after wind and falsehood had told lies and said, I will speak out to you concerning wine and liquor, he would be spokesman to this people. I will surely assemble all of you, Jacob. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together like sheep in the fold, like a flock in the midst of his pasture. They will be noisy with men. The breaker goes up before them. They break out, pass through the gate, and go out by it. So their king goes on before them, and Yahweh at their head. Chapter 3. And I said, hear now, heads of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel, is it not for you to know justice? You who hate good and love evil, who tear off their skin from them and their flesh from their bones, who eat the flesh of my people, strip off their skin from them, break their bones, and chop them up as for the pot and as meat in a kettle. Then they will cry out to Yahweh, but he will not answer them. Instead, he will hide his face from them at that time, because they have practiced evil deeds. Thus says Yahweh concerning the prophets who lead my people astray. When they have something to bite with their teeth, they cry peace. But against him who puts nothing in their mouths, they declare holy war. Therefore, it will be night for you without vision, and darkness for you without divination. The sun will go down on the prophets, and the day will become dark over them. The seers will be ashamed, and the diviners will be embarrassed. Indeed, they will all cover their mouths, because there's no answer from Elohim. On the other hand, I am filled with power, with the spirit of Yahweh, and with justice and courage, to make known to Jacob his rebellious act, even to Israel his sin. Now hear this, heads of the house of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel, who abhor justice and twist everything that is straight, who build Zion with bloodshed and Jerusalem with violent injustice. Her leaders pronounce judgment for a bribe, her priests instruct for a price, and her prophets divine for money. Yet they lean on Yahweh, saying, is not Yahweh in our midst? Calamity will not come upon us. Therefore, on account of you, Zion will be plowed as a field. Jerusalem will become a heap of ruins, and the mountain of the temple will become high places of a forest. Chapter 4. And it will come about in the last days that the mountain of the house of Yahweh will be established as the chief of the mountains, will be raised above the hills, and the peoples will stream to it. Many nations will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh and to the house of the Elohim of Jacob, that he may teach us about his ways and that we may walk in his paths. For from Zion will go forth the law, even the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. And he will judge between many peoples and render decisions from mighty distant nations. Then they will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they train for war. Each of them will sit under his vine and under his fig tree, with no one to make them afraid. For the mouth of Yahweh of hosts has spoken. Though all the peoples walk each in the name of his Elohim, as for us, we will walk in the name of Yahweh, our Elohim, forever and ever. And that day, declares Yahweh, I will assemble the lame and gather the outcasts, even those whom I have afflicted. I will make the lame a remnant and the outcast a strong nation. and Yahweh will reign over them in Mount Zion from now on and forever. As for you, tower of the flock, hill of the daughter of Zion, to you it will come. Even the former dominion will come, the kingdom of the daughter of Jerusalem. Now, why do you cry out loudly? Is there no king among you, or has your counselor perished? That agony has gripped you like a woman in childbirth? Writhe and labor to give birth, daughter of Zion, like a woman in childbirth, for now you will go out of the city, dwell in the field, and go to Babylon. There you will be rescued. There Yahweh will redeem you from the hand of your enemies. And now many nations have been assembled against you, who say, let her be polluted, and let our eyes gloat over Zion. But they do not know the thoughts of Yahweh, and they do not understand his purpose. For he has gathered them like sheaves to the threshing floor. Arise and thresh, daughter of Zion, for your horn I will make iron, and your hooves I will make bronze, that you may pulverize many peoples, that you may devote to Yahweh their unjust gain, and their wealth to Yahweh of all the earth. Chapter 5. Now muster yourselves in troops, daughter of troops. They have laid siege against us. With a rod they will smite the judge of Israel on the cheek. But as for you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you one will go forth for me to be ruler in Israel. His goings forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity. Therefore, he will give them up until the time when she who is in labor has borne a child. Then the remainder of his brethren will return to the sons of Israel. And he will arise and shepherd his flock in the strength of Yahweh, in the majesty of the name of Yahweh, his Elohim. And they will remain, because at that time he will be great to the ends of the earth. This one will be our peace. When the Assyrian invades our land, when he tramples on our citadels, then we will raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 leaders of men. They will shepherd the land of Assyria with the sword, the land of Nimrod at its entrances. And he will deliver us from the Assyrian when he attacks our land and when he tramples our territory. Then the remnant of Jacob will be among many peoples, like dew from Yahweh, like showers on vegetation, which do not wait for man or delay for the sons of men. The remnant of Jacob will be among the nations, among many peoples, like a lion among the beasts of the forest, like a young lion among flocks of sheep, which if he passes through, tramples down and tears, and there's none to rescue. Your hand will be lifted up against your adversaries, and all your enemies will be cut off. It will be in that day, declares Yahweh, that I will cut off your horses from among you and destroy your chariots. I will also cut off the cities of your land and tear down all your fortifications. I will cut off sorceries from your hand, and you will have fortune tellers no more. I will cut off your carved images and your sacred pillars from among you, so that you will no longer bow down to the work of your hands. I will root out your Asherim from among you and destroy your cities. And I will execute vengeance and anger and wrath on the nations which have not obeyed. Chapter 6. Hear now what Yahweh is saying. Arise, plead your case before the mountains, and let the hills hear your voice. Listen, you mountains, to the indictment of Yahweh, and you enduring foundations of the earth, because Yahweh has a case against his people. Even with Israel he will dispute. My people, what have I done to you? And how have I wearied you? Answer me. Indeed, I brought you up from the land of Egypt and ransomed you from the house of slavery. And I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. My people, remember now what Balak, king of Moab, counseled, and what Balaam, son of Beor, answered him, and from Shittim to Gilgal, so that you might know the righteous acts of Yahweh. With what shall I come to Yahweh and bow myself before the Elohim on high? Shall I come to him with burnt offerings, with yearling calves? Does Yahweh take delight in thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I present my firstborn for my rebellious acts, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does Yahweh require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your Elohim. The voice of Yahweh will call to the city, and it is sound wisdom to fear your name. Hear, O tribe, who was appointed its time. Is there yet a man in the wicked house, along with treasures of wickedness and a short measure that is cursed? Can I justify wicked scales and a bag of deceptive weights? For the rich men of the city are full of violence. Her residents speak lies, and their tongue is deceitful in their mouth. So also I will make you sick, striking you down, desolating you because of your sins. You will leap, but you will not be satisfied, and your vileness will be in your midst. You will try to remove for safekeeping, but you will not preserve anything. And what you do preserve, I will give to the sword. You will sow, but you will not reap. You will tread the olive, but will not anoint yourself with oil, and the grapes, but you will not drink wine. The statutes of Omri and all the works of the house of Ahab are observed, and in their devices you walk. Therefore, I will give you up for destruction, and your inhabitants for derision, and you will bear the reproach of my people. Chapter 7. Woe is me, for I am like the fruit pickers, like the grape gatherers. There's not a cluster of grapes to eat or a first ripe fig which I crave. The righteous person has perished from the land, and there is no upright person among men. All of them lie in wait for bloodshed. Each of them hunts the other with a net. Concerning evil, both hands do it well. The prince asks also the judge for a bribe, and a great man speaks the desire of his soul. So they weave it together. The best of them is like a briar, the most upright like a thorn hedge. The day when you post your watchman, your punishment will come. Then their confusion will occur. Do not trust in a neighbor. Do not have confidence in a friend. From her who lies in your bosom, guard your lips. For son treats father contemptuously. Daughter rises up against mother. Daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own household. But as for me, I will watch expectantly for Yahweh. I will wait for the Elohim of my salvation. My Elohim will hear me. Do not rejoice over me, O my enemy. Though I fall, I will rise. Though I dwell in darkness, Yahweh is a light for me. I will bear the indignation of Yahweh because I have sinned against him until he pleads my case and executes justice for me. He will bring me out to the light, and I will see his righteousness. Then my enemy will see, and shame will cover her who said to me, where is Yahweh, your Elohim? My eyes will look on her. At that time, she will be trampled down like mire of the streets. It'll be a day for building your walls. On that day, will your boundary be extended? It'll be a day when they will come to you from Assyria and the cities of Egypt, from Egypt even to the Euphrates, even from sea to sea and mountain to mountain. And the earth will become desolate because of her inhabitants on account of the fruit of their deeds. Shepherd your people with your scepter, the flock of your possession, which dwells by itself in the woodland, in the midst of a fruitful field. Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead as in the days of old, as in the days when you came out from the land of Egypt. I will show you miracles. Nations will see and be ashamed of all their might. They will put their hand on their mouth. Their ears will be deaf. They will lick the dust like a serpent, like reptiles of the earth. They will come trembling out of their fortresses. To Yahweh, our Elohim, they will come in dread, and they will be afraid before you. Who is an Elohim like you, who pardons iniquity and passes over the rebellious act of the remnant of his possession? He does not retain his anger forever, because he delights in unchanging love. He will again have compassion on us. He will tread our iniquities underfoot. Yes, you will cast all their sins into the depths of the sea. You will give truth to Jacob and unchanging love to Abraham, which you swore to our forefathers from the days of old. And that is the book of the prophet Micah. So let's talk about the prophet Micah for a little bit. I'll just have a little bit of commentary along the way here. I do want to look up a couple of things, so just bear with me while I do that. So Micah is a contemporary, while I'm looking for that, Micah is a contemporary of the prophet Isaiah. He's a younger contemporary, but he preaches roughly around the same time. As a matter of fact, if you, and I'll share this with you first while I'm looking for my other sources here. If you look at the book of Isaiah, you should see the text on the screen in a minute here. And for this one, I'll just use the New King James version because I have it up already. So if you look at Isaiah chapter 4, starting with verse 2, Isaiah chapter 2, the word that Isaiah, can everyone see that, by the way? We see it, okay. The word that Isaiah the son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem, now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of Yahweh's house shall be established on the top of the mountains. This is exactly what you saw in Micah 4. And you even see the notation, the annotation here in this version, Micah 4, 1-5. You can see the same text there. It's almost word for word, okay. So he's a contemporary of Isaiah, but where we are told, when you look at the very beginning of Micah, in the very first verse, the word of Yahweh which came to Micah of Moresheth, and Moresheth is in a rural town in the southwest, about 25 miles southwest of Jerusalem. And it's a rural area, which is interesting in and of itself because Micah was not a city prophet, right? He wasn't in Jerusalem. He wasn't in one of the major cities like some of the other prophets were. But Micah was actually in a rural area, which is to me significant because he got to see sort of, for lack of a better term, the common people, right, who were being oppressed by the leaders of the time. He's prophesying in the days leading up to the Assyrian takeover of the northern kingdom of Israel. And then, of course, about 100 years later, you would have, in the time of Jeremiah, you would have the Babylonians, and he foretells how Babylon also is going to deal with them. So when you look at this here, the word of Yahweh which came to Micah of Moresheth in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. So this is the time frame. He's a contemporary of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. So he probably started prophesying around the time of Jotham, and then he would have ended around the time of Hezekiah, all kings of Judah. And these are the things which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem. So whenever you see something like Samaria and Jerusalem, what are we talking about? Well, these are capital cities, right? So when you consider the northern kingdom of Israel, its capital was in Samaria. So, when you look, we haven't really studied the prophets extensively. That's a project that I'd like to do, Yahweh willing, in the future, and look at some of the commonalities with the prophets. And you will find that whenever you see them use conventions of language, one of the things that they will typically do is they will use one thing to represent a broader thing or a more specific thing. So whenever you see Samaria, a lot of times the context of Samaria is going to be, when you see Samaria and that equals, right? If you're looking at it on a piece of paper, it'll say something like Samaria equals the northern kingdom of Israel, right? Because the capital represents the northern kingdom. It's kind of like when we say, and Washington says blah blah blah, right? In our modern day and age, we're not talking about the city of Washington per se, right? We're not talking about that geographic place called Washington in and of itself, for itself. When we say, out of Washington comes the word, we just heard word out of Washington that Russia has attacked Ukraine or whatever, right? Well, what does that mean? It means that we know that the leadership in Washington has explained something, or Washington has done something economically or whatever it may be, because you're referring to the capital itself, right? So Washington is the symbol for that. That's what you're seeing here with Samaria and Jerusalem. Samaria being the representation of Israel, the northern kingdom, and then Jerusalem being representative of Judah, the southern kingdom. So when he's talking about the word which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem, he's not saying concerning what's going to happen to that capital city, Samaria, or that capital city, Jerusalem. It's beyond that. He's talking about the entire nation, right? This is the word of Yahweh. This is the word of Yahweh, which Micah saw for Israel and for Judah, right? This is what he's saying. So he's alternating between talking about Assyria and how Assyria is going to take over the kingdom of Israel, and overthrow it. And then a little bit later, he talks about what's going to happen to Jerusalem, but in a very smaller, in a smaller way. So he's down here in verse 5. What is the rebellion of Jacob? That's another thing, right? Jacob. What is Jacob? It's Israel, right? What is the rebellion of Jacob? He's not talking about the personage of Jacob. He's talking about Jacob as metaphor, Jacob as representing the nation of Israel. What is the rebellion of Jacob? Is it not Samaria? Right? In other words, everything that Samaria is doing right now, everything that Samaria represents in the northern kingdom, this is what's going on. It represents the rebellion of the whole place. What is the high place of Judah? Is it not Jerusalem? Right? Because Jerusalem is the capital, so it represents the entire place. And he says, I will make Samaria a heap of ruins in the open country. He's not just talking about the actual physical geographic city of Samaria. He's talking about all of Israel, that the Assyrians are going to come and lay bare. And he talks about the Assyrians a little bit further down. Okay. So when you look at all this, we'll come back to that. But I want to go back to the very beginning here in Micah 1. So he's a contemporary of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. And I wanted to see if I could find sort of a chart here. And by the way, the term Micah, if you look at the last chapter in chapter 7, it kind of gives you a clue. So he says in Micah 7 verse 18, who is an Elohim like you, right? This is sort of an allusion to his name, although his name, Micah, Mikael, who is like Yahweh, essentially is what it means, right? And he's again a contemporary of the prophet Isaiah. Okay. Let me see if I see the chart that I wanted to show you. I just wanted to give you sort of a sense geographically, but this is not a full-blown study, so it's not really necessary. I'm not seeing it anywhere, so we'll just skip that for now. But let's go back to the actual text and take a look at some of the things that he's saying here. What he's doing is he's alternating between oracles, and the word oracle means sort of a pronouncement. It's a prophetic pronouncement, the oracle. And he's alternating between oracles where he's describing the sins of Israel and Judah, and then he's describing the judgments that Yahweh is going to bring upon Israel and Judah, and then ultimately, so as not to leave it on a negative of judgment, he's also talking to them about the hope that they ultimately have in Yahweh and his salvation. And he goes sort of back and forth. He has 3 different sets of oracles, and I'll point them out to you here. And I'm going to use for that this book, How to Read the Bible, book for book, because it lays it out pretty nicely. This is by Gordon Fee and Douglas Stewart. So let me just kind of give you a sense of where you're going to find these. So if you're going to write these down, if you're looking chapter 1, verse 2 to 16, I'll give them to you, then I'll go back and sort of explain it. 1, 2 to 16 is the first series of threats, and that's against Samaria and Jerusalem. In other words, against Israel and Judah. The first series of threats. So it's a series of oracles. And then 2, 1 to 11 are the reasons for judgment. 2, 1 to 11, the reasons for judgment. 2, 12 to 13, the first word of hope. 2, 12 to 13, the first word of hope. Then 3, 1 to 12, so pretty much chapter 3, is the second series of threats and reasons. And that is, it's a collection of 3 oracles, but specifically in that case, whereas the first 3 oracles, we're talking about Samaria and Jerusalem in general, Israel and Judah, this second series of oracles, the 3 oracles, is against specifically the leaders and the prophets who were doing things or not doing things, as the case may be, that were causing the people to go in a certain direction, and therefore inviting Yahweh's judgment. And then 4:1 to 5:15 is the second word of hope. And this is huge, right? Because this is sort of at the center of the prophetic book. 4:1 to 5:15. So chapters 4 and 5 sit in the center of this 7-chapter book. And that's the word of the hope of the Messianic King. This is where you have the very famous pronouncement of the Messiah that you see also indicated in the book of Matthew, among other places. So if you go, let's say, to Matthew 2, now after Yahshua was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east, is that text up? Is that text still coming up? Okay. Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem saying, where is he who has been born king of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. And then when Herod calls these chief priests and scribes, who were the people who supposedly knew the law, right? And they did. He inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. In verse 5, they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, for out of you shall come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people of Israel. Well, where is that coming from? Obviously, that's coming right here from Micah, right? And you'll find that elsewhere as well. So if you go back to the beginning of Micah, he's addressing this to all of the earth, right? It's a pronouncement to all the earth, and he's bringing a case against Israel and Judah. So it's a case against them, describes what the judgment is going to be like in terms of exile. So, exile is the ultimate judgment that is described here. So if you look towards the end of this chapter, he talks about in verse 16, make yourself bald and cut off your hair because of the children of your delight. Extend your baldness like the eagle, for they will go from you into exile. That's the ultimate punishment out of all these other things that are done. And remember that exile is sort of the equivalent of death, right? It's Eden all over again, but for the entire nation. And so the northern kingdom of Israel would be exiled into Assyria, and then the southern kingdom of Judah eventually would be exiled into Babylon. And you see both those things described in this book. Babylon is described a little bit later. Assyria comes first, obviously. Okay, and then you have the reasons for that, and then you have the hopes. And 4 and 5, chapters 4 and 5 are the central hope in all of this, which is the promised Messiah, the Davidic Messiah, who is going to be the one to restore Israel and Judah. And then chapter 6 is Elohim's case against Jerusalem. So it's the third word of threat, right? And this is where it's presented like a court case. So if you look at Micah chapter 6, he's got witnesses, right? Arise, plead your case before the mountains, let the hills hear your voice. It's all poetic, yes? Where they're making a case against the people on behalf of Yahweh. Listen, you mountains, to the indictment of Yahweh, and during foundations of the earth, because Yahweh has a case against his people. Even with Israel, he will dispute. And then he makes the case, and essentially he says to them, what have I ever done to you that you treat me like this, right? I took you out of Egypt. I did everything good for you. I brought you out of Egypt and gave you individuals to nurture you, like Moses and Aaron and Miriam. And look what I did with Balaam when Balak, the king of Moab, wanted to destroy you. And here are all these other mighty acts that I did. And then this is how you repay me, right? You repay me by going into outright rebellion. So Yahweh's making a case against them. And of course, this is all poetic in nature, right? And then he's sort of reading them the riot act about the approach that they've taken, because they've been doing, and the whole book talks about this, right? When you look at the case that's made against them, whether it's against the nation itself and then the leaders who are supposed to represent them. And by the way, it's all kinds of leaders. It's their secular leaders. Well, secular doesn't really exactly take on the same term, the same meaning as it does in our day, because in those days, even the secular leaders were religious in nature, right? But so maybe secular is not the best word, but the governmental leaders, let's put it that way, the kings and, all the people who are in charge of cities and all that, the governors, etc. But then on top of that, the religious leaders as well, right? The folks who should have known better and who should have been holding the governmental leaders to account. and they weren't. And everyone was corrupt. Everyone was doing their own thing for their own gain, right? They said, you hear them talking about how they did things for money and how they were doing things bribing people, right? And doing things essentially to feed their own bellies. Not very different than the kind of things that we see in our day with regard to both, in our case, certainly secular and also religious leaders. So there are injustices. Everything centers around religious offenses, which are inherently tied in with social injustice, right? The way that they're taking advantage of the people for their own gain instead of feeding them and taking care of their spiritual and other needs. It's there's a very, throughout the scriptures, there's a very high premium placed upon leaders taking care of those under their charge. Leaders are supposed to be good stewards. They're supposed stewards of the resources given to them. They're supposed to be models, examples to the people of righteousness and morality. So whenever you have these heinous acts that are being committed, Yahweh is incredibly displeased, because if the leaders are not going to show the example, then everyone else falls into that same, morass of wickedness. And Yahweh holds the leaders directly responsible, both the governmental leaders and the religious leaders as well. And it's what kinds of things is it? It's the lack of justice, right? It's the lack of caring for the social needs of the people, caring for the material needs of the people, right? And then on top of everything else, when he's going into this case against them, what are we seeing here? We're seeing in this whole section in Micah 6, we're seeing that their answer is not to right their wrongs by starting to do the right things, by starting to do justice and everything else. And instead, their response is, let's throw more religion at the problem, right? Because anyone can do religious acts, because the religious acts, without the intent, the true intent behind it, are devoid of meaning, right? So what does he say to them? With what shall I come to Yahweh and bow myself before the Elohim on high? This is Micah 6:6. Shall I come to him with burnt offerings, with yearling calves? In other words, these are the things that people thought what Yahweh wanted, right? If you do these things, you ward the Almighty away, right? As long as you're doing these things, then you're going through all the motions and Yahweh sees it and it's wonderful, right? Yeah, all the sacrifices are done. And Yahweh's saying, what is this nonsense? Is this what you think I'm about? You're not looking to do things. You're missing the whole point, right? This is about having character. This is about loving people. This is about being compassionate. This is about humility. That's what I'm about. What do you think I am? Like one of the pagan deities that you have been worshiping all these years, and with all the idols, you think I'm just like one of them? You're so corrupt in thinking, corrupted in your minds, that you think that you can just placate me by offering, a bunch of, offerings. And I don't care how many there are. You think that by the sheer volume of the offerings that you're going to give, somehow that impresses me? Look at that. Thousands of rams, 10,000 rivers of oil. And then even, for emphasis and for effect, he says, shall I even give my firstborn for my rebellious acts? In other words, what do you want to do? Give me the fruit of your womb, like the worshipers of Molech, for example? That destroy their own children, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul. It's kind of like, remember that he's a contemporary of Isaiah. And isn't that what we see in the very first chapter of Isaiah as well? Similar mindset, right? This is the way that people think, that as long as I throw these things to Yahweh, the sacrifices, that's why the sacrificial system wasn't worth anything, because there was no intent behind it, right? This is what Yahweh said to him. Listen, this is Isaiah 1:1. Listen, listen, O heavens, hear, O earth. Again, it's like a court case. You're presenting to witnesses, right? Heavens, earth, hear my case, right? For Yahweh speaks. I've reared up sons, and they rebelled against me. An ox knows its owner, a donkey knows its manger, but Israel doesn't know who I am, right? Even the dumb animals, he doesn't quite put it that way, but even the dumb animals know who they serve. But my people don't know who they serve. My people don't understand. They're clueless. They're tone deaf, right? Alas, sinful nation, people weighed down with iniquity, right? Sons who act corruptly, they've abandoned Yahweh, despised the Holy One, they turned away from him. And then, they're sick from head to toe. And no one could fix this. Your land is desolate. Your cities are burned with fire, etc. And then he goes down in verse 10. Hear the word of Yahweh, you rulers of Sodom. He compares them to Sodom. Give ear to the who are equally clueless. Give ear to the destruction of Elohim, you people of Gomorrah, Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Great examples for them to follow. This is metaphor. What are your multiplied sacrifices to me, says Yahweh? I've had enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fed cattle. I take no pleasure in the blood of bulls, lambs, or goats. When you come to appear before me, who requires of you this trampling of my courts? Not me, is the implication, right? Bring your worthless offerings no longer. Stop bringing all this garbage. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath, the calling of assemblies. Yeah, I cannot endure iniquity in the solemn assembly. Why? Because the new moon and the Sabbath are bad, like some people want to make it, because they want to use these to proof text that you no longer have to keep new moon and Sabbath. No. Keep reading. I hate your new moon festivals and your appointed feasts because they're you mix them with iniquity. They're your feasts and your festivals and your feasts. They're not mine. That's not the kind of new moon that I call for. It's not the kind of Sabbath I call for. They become a burden to me. I'm weary of bearing them. So when you spread out your hands in prayer, I'll hide my eyes from you. Even though you give many prayers, I'm not going to listen. Why? Because you don't get it. Your hands are covered with blood. Right? You're committing murder, whether that's physically or metaphorically, you're doing it. Here's the real solution. Wash yourselves. Make yourselves clean. Again, it's metaphor. Has nothing to do with ritual washing. Has to do with washing your heart. Remove the evil of your deeds from my sight. Cease to do evil. Stop doing evil. This is not rocket science. This is pretty simple. Don't do evil and start doing good, right? When is a thief no longer a thief? Remember? When he stops stealing? No. When he stops stealing and then he starts doing productive things to contribute rather than to take away. Cease to do evil. Yes, stop doing the evil, but then start doing good in its place. Seek what? Justice. Reprove the ruthless. Defend the orphan. Plead for the widow, right? If you do these things, justice, taking care of the orphan, taking care of the widow, reproving those who are bullies, let's reason together. Though your sins are as scarlet, they'll be white as snow. This is the kind of stuff that's going to clean your sin. This is what all these thousands of animals are supposed to do. These rivers of oil and rivers of blood that you got going are meaningless. But if you do these things, it will clean all of your sin. As simple as that is, right? It's kind of like what we talked about last week with the expectations that Elijah had about the word of Yahweh, looking for it in the earthquake and in the powerful winds and the thunders. It wasn't in any of that. It was in the quiet whisper, because Yahweh's not going to do it the way the nations do it, right? He's going to do it his way. Messiah did the same thing with his disciples who were looking for a king to come conquering and to kill. And he said, that's not the way we're going to do it. We're going to do it this other way. We're going to do it through service. We're going to do it through humility. We're going to do it through compassion, through healing, through the acts and actions of love, you see. And this is exactly what Isaiah is talking about here. And then we go back to Micah. That's exactly what Micah is talking about in this court case. No, none of these things are important. He has told you, O man, verse 8, what is good. And this is, to me, the center of this entire book. And what does Yahweh require? What does Yahweh require of you? He says to them. What is it that he really wants? He's told you what's good. It's no mystery. You don't have to seek it out. You don't have to come up with books and tomes of different things. It's actually quite simple. This is why when people start arguing about the law and the Torah this and this and that and the tzitzit and the this, I want to scream, and I just want to, push it all the way anymore. I don't have patience for that kind of stuff anymore. This is not complicated. Here it is, right here. If you want to know, stop looking for every last T being crossed, every last I being dotted on the Sabbath, and make sure that you're doing it exactly this way, and making sure that this is done that way, and make sure that this is, and you got to hang this way, and you got to do 3 twirls, and you got to make sure you alternate between the blue string and the red string. And stop. He's told you what is good. Here it is, right there. What does Yahweh require of you? Do justice. What does that mean? Go seek it out. Search the scriptures. You have many examples of justice. Start with your Messiah, because he shows you what justice is about. He gives you parables that describes what justice is about. He shows on every page in the New Testament, he describes what justice looks like. Follow that. Follow the model example. Love kindness. Where do you find that out? Again, look to your Messiah. Find out about the kind deeds that he did, and then search the rest of the scriptures for other acts of kindness as well. And you don't have to go far to practice it. You can walk outside your door and start practicing those things immediately. And you don't have to keep on looking at the Torah, the Torah mitzvah, and this, that, and this. And I forgot what they call that thing, the Taryag mitzvah, and all these different little things, and the 20 different volumes on this. Why? Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your Elohim. How do you walk humbly with your Elohim? You walk with obedience, right? You listen to what he says, and to the best of your ability, you do it. And the way that first starts is with the ones that you can see in front of you, right? This is 1 John 5 stuff. If you can't do it with the people that you could see, how do you expect to do it with the one that you can't see? Yes? Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your Elohim. This is where the golden rule comes from, no? To do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is Hillel, who was asked by the Gentile who wanted to trip him up, because that's what people do when they don't want to do what's right. They're going to find a way to tear the righteous down. They're going to tear you down. They themselves won't walk in it, but they're going to find a way to mock you and to tear you down. So he goes to Hillel and says, teach me the Torah while standing on one foot. Give me the whole Torah if you're such a smart teacher, right? Is the implication. And Hillel said, okay, my son, do what you would have others do to you, go ahead and do that to them, or some such thing, he said to them. Golden rule. And he says to him, that's the Torah in a nutshell. The rest is commentary. Now go and study it. But you want to know what to do? You want to know the entire Torah, what sums up the entire Torah? Do to other people what you would like them to do to you. Because when you're looking out for your own self-interest, right? You know the kind of things that satisfy, because you look out for your own self-interest by nature, by its very nature. So start there, right? If you can't start at a place where you're thinking of someone else, think about what your needs are and make sure that you do it for other people as well. And there's so much more that we could say about that, right? But you don't need to go searching the umpteen depths of whatever to figure out what's right. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your Elohim. And you know what? You're going to make mistakes along the way in terms of the specifics of the Torah. That's okay. That's why you continue to study Torah. But that's not what's important, right? That's why I say to you, if people come to you and they want to argue about the law, walk away. It's not worth it. Been there, done that, was a card-carrying member. I don't participate anymore. I tore up my membership card in the school of let's argue about the scriptures. I don't do that anymore. At least I try not to, right? And I urge you not to do it either. Instead, there's too much energy wasted on that foolishness. Instead, let me direct all my energy to learning what Micah said, learning what is justice, learning how to humble myself, how to be humble, and how to walk humbly with my Elohim, right? Love kindness. That's the word I'm looking for. Those are the things that I want to concentrate on. That's where I want to devote my attention, because those are the things that are going to draw me closer to my neighbor and that are going to draw me closer to Yahweh. And when we do those things, we will be back on track as compared to what Micah was observing in his time. Because the kind of things that Micah was seeing are the kind of things that we're seeing in our day, because there's nothing new under the sun, right? And then the last things here, chapter 6 is Yahweh's case against Jerusalem. And then 1-7, Micah's lament, where he's, again, metaphorically lamenting the kind of things that they've been observing. But then verses 8-20 is that third word of hope, which is the hope for the future, which is within Yahweh's Messiah, right? And he's describing, he's giving a prayer and then he's giving Yahweh's response to the prayer. So verses uh, uh, verses verse 14 is Micah's prayer, where he says, "Shepherd your people with your scepter, the flock of your possession, which dwells by itself in the woodland, in the midst of a fruitful field. Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead as in the days of old." He wants to bring back what it was in the days of old, the abundance and the beauty and the peace that they used to have. And then Yahweh responds, right? The rest of the book, the last several verses, 15 to 20, is Yahweh's response. Just like when you came out of the land of Egypt, I'm going to show you miracles. Nations are going to be ashamed that they ever tried to hurt you, right? They're going to fear me, and they're going to leave you alone, right? And he describes everything else that that revolves around Yahweh's character. And by the way, that also revolves around Yahweh's promises to Abraham. So if you look at verse 20, the very last verse, you will give truth to Jacob and unchanging love to Abraham, which you swore to our forefathers from the days of old. So in other words, Yahweh is going to fulfill through us, through Israel, through Judah, to those who love him. He's going to fulfill what he had said to Abraham, what he had said to Jacob, and what he had said to Abraham that he would do, right? Well, Abraham first and then later to Jacob, yes? So what am I talking about? Genesis 12, where Yahweh says to Abraham, through you, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. Remember that he started out this entire book. It's not just, although it focuses around Israel and Judah, this is to everybody, right? Verse 2, hear, O peoples, all of you. Listen, O earth, and all it contains. And he goes on from there. And of course, Israel and Judah are central to it because of their history with Almighty Yahweh and because the Messiah comes from that nation. But this is for all of the earth, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through Abraham. So the whole prophetic utterance of Micah is trying to bring them back to the promises that were made through Abraham for all the nations. And of course, all of that is embodied ultimately by the leader himself, who is Yahshua the Messiah. So all this points to that messianic Davidic king who is going to lead the way and is going to help bring them back to a restoration. And therefore, through their restoration, Israel and Judah, through their restoration, the entire earth would be blessed. Okay. And that in a nutshell is what Micah is all about. And there's so much more that we could say about Micah, but that's all I want to share today. Are there any questions, or is there anything that I can review or clarify? What does it mean, a contemporary of Isaiah? The word contemporary means someone who lived, and in this case prophesied around the same time. So if you look at Isaiah, you can't say that Isaiah was a contemporary of Jeremiah, because Jeremiah lived about 100 years later, right? So you have prophets that are removed from each other by several generations, but then you have some that were contemporaries of one another. So what I'm saying is that Micah lived and prophesied at the same time as Isaiah. Now, probably Isaiah was much older than he was, but he would have been prophesying Micah. That's why I want to show that timeline. Micah would have been prophesying probably towards the end of Isaiah's time, but he was still a contemporary of Isaiah. We see that Micah was prophesying during the reigns of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. So Micah was a contemporary of Jotham, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. So he would have, for example, known Hezekiah, right? So it helps give you perspective on who the prophet was. It's a good question. Any other questions? You're welcome. Okay, this is as good as any. Let me show you this here. I just did a quick Google search here. Okay, let me know if you can see that chart. Okay. So if you look at this chart, and I don't know what the source of this chart is, so I'm just kind of taking a chance here. But Bible Lessons International, I don't know that outfit, but anyway, if you look at this chart, you see Micah right over here. Okay, so can everyone see Micah right here? Okay, so if you see Micah, notice that you have Isaiah concurrently here, right? So Isaiah is a little bit before. So if you look at the year 722, this is when Assyria would have taken the nation of Israel into captivity, right? So you have Micah prophesying down here, and then Isaiah prophesying here. They both prophesied about the captivity in Assyria. And then if you looked at, they're not showing it here, but if you looked at the kings, I mean, they are showing it over here, but it's kind of hard to, you see these symbols over here on the side. And I'm just interpreting this right on the spot because I've never seen this chart before. So all these kings, this is around the time when they would have prophesied, right? So you have, we're told that Jotham, I don't see Jotham here, but yeah, I do see Hezekiah, like right around here, okay? I'm not so sure I agree with Micah being all the way down here. I'm thinking he's going to be more up here, okay? Because he would have prophesied before Assyria took, these scholars, they want to always say, oh, well, it happened after the fact, and, because they don't want to believe that there's a prophetic element that they're actually doing it before the fact, and they always want to finagle things to, but Michael would have been prophesying before Assyria took the northern kingdom of Israel. So here's Isaiah, and then about 100 years later, oh, I see what they're doing. Okay, I get it. All right, so here's what happens. I'm looking at it. You probably have to turn it to the right side. Okay, all right, my bad. So usually when you see a chart that's vertical like this, the dates are going from the most recent, no, from the past up top, and then as you go down, they're showing you more into the present day. That's not what this is. It's the reverse. You see that? So you remember that when you're looking at BCE, which is what this is, it goes down. So this is after, because I'm looking for it. I'm looking for Jeremiah down here somewhere, and I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing him up here. That's not right. It is right the way that they have this. You see that? So you have Assyria here. I don't know if this can be turned to on its right side. I don't think so, but at least not here. But we're looking at it going up this way. So this is from the past going into the present, right? So here is Micah prophesying around the same time as Isaiah, and both are prophesying before Assyria takes the northern kingdom in 722. So this is in fact correct. And then you see Hezekiah over here, and then they're not showing Jotham or Ahaz, but Jotham or Ahaz would have been around here somewhere, okay? And then if you go about 100 years later, then you see Jeremiah, who prophesied during the time of the Babylonian exile. So you see Assyria here, then Babylonia, then Persia, and then up here would be Greece, right? And then Rome eventually going as you go up. Okay, so that's absolutely right. All right. So that's kind of it's always good to check the chronologies because it helps you to have a better picture of who said what. So you look at a chart like this, I don't know, I'd have to double check the facts on this, but according to these folks, Obadiah was a contemporary of Joel, right? And they were all contemporaries of Haggai, Zechariah. There was a bunch of them, right? In the time of Ezra. And then in the time of Jeremiah, you would have Ezekiel, Daniel, and that's a fact, right? Because Daniel was in the midst of Babylon and then eventually Persia. And Ezekiel also was a prophet of the exile. And then, but there were also contemporaries of Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. You see that? Okay, so this and Amos and Hosea were way back here, contemporaries of Isaiah and Micah. So Amos and Hosea would have been Hosea may be around the same time. Amos would have been a little bit before, and Jonah is in there as well. So interesting. Okay, so this is just a quick little quickie like look at the prophet Nahum. Like I said, I hope in the future to do more on the minor prophets. It's one of the areas that I have not studied quite as much as some of the other things. So I'd have to really hit the books on that one. But I think it'll be fascinating, and it will help us to have some good perspectives on the things that they valued. Very important because they were the ones, the prophets. They were the ones who were the guardians of the Torah, right? And they were the ones who kept the people on track. So it's important for us to know those things. People have tried. There have been one or two versions that have tried to put the Bible in order chronologically, but as you can imagine, it's very disconcerting for people because they're not used to seeing it that way, and it can be more confusing than helpful to try to do it in chronological order. I think there's actually something out there called the chronological Bible, and you know, it's one of those things that it's helpful for study, but it's not very helpful in the day to day because it confuses people because everything is just so different than what people are normally used to seeing. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we've done just about a little bit, just a pinch over an hour. Okay, my friends,